I think Gen Z gets written off as dramatic a lot, but if you actually look at the stuff people our age are scared of, it kind of makes sense. This isn't random anxiety or being soft. A lot of it is very real, very structural, and very hard to ignore. We're the first generation to grow up watching everything get documented, archived, priced out, automated, and judged in real time. Housing feels unreachable. Relationships feel unstable. One wrong move can live online forever. And on top of that, you're constantly being compared to people who look perfect, and you might get replaced by software tomorrow. So when people say Gen Z is anxious or paranoid, it's like, yeah, look at the environment. These aren't imaginary fears, they're just a logical reaction to the world we were handed. That's why I want to talk about the fears that actually define Gen Z. These are in no particular order, and some of these might seem more serious than others, but I think they're all valid in their own way, so I want to discuss them. Starting off, we have to discuss the fear of not owning a home, because this is ridiculous.
I don't want to drive housing prices down. I want to drive housing prices up.
A new survey found that 21% of respondents believe World War III is more likely to happen in the next 5 years than them buying a home. Nearly the same share think they'll be more likely to win the fucking lottery in the same time frame. I don't understand how it's possible that you have people entering the workforce in Gen Z in the United States that are not even sure if they're going to get to have a house. Gen Z is the first generation that never had a realistic path into homeownership. Like, by the time we hit adulthood, housing prices were already completely disconnected from wages, so there was no buy cheap early phase that older generations had. At the same time, rent became so expensive that it had stopped being a stepping stone and it turned into a permanent drain on income, making it almost impossible to save for a down payment. On top of that, Gen Z isn't competing with other first-time buyers anymore. We're competing with corporations and investors who can pay cash and don't care about interest rates, add student loan debt, higher mortgage rates, and wages that haven't kept up, and even people who do everything right still can't afford to buy. And because jobs are concentrated in expensive cities, the just move somewhere cheaper argument usually means giving up career opportunities, so a lot of people are stuck choosing between financial survival now or the possibility of owning a home later with no option that actually feels stable. According to the National Association of Realtors, in 2025, the median age of first-time homebuyers in the US reached a record high of 40 years old, up from 38 years old in 2024. Let's say that you just turned 19 in 2025 instead of staying 18 back in 24. Your paycheck probably didn't jump much. You're still young, you got entry-level wages, maybe a tiny raise if you're lucky. You're still scraping by on that starter salary while rent devours half of it. But in that 1 year, from 2024 to 25, the housing market cranked up in difficulty. So congrats, you aged 1 year and your income barely moved, but the bar to buy your first place effectively rose about 5%. You, for the crime of being 18 years old, are now punished with a 5% difficulty increase in experiencing an essential life purchase. Moving on from that, we have to talk about Gen Z and isolation and loneliness. It's not just that we're anxious about relationships, we are statistically more isolated than any generation before us. Around 70% of Gen Z report feeling lonely or socially isolated at least some of the time, even though we're supposedly the most connected generation in history. Nearly half of us say that we have fewer friends than we'd like, and over half of us say that we have few or no friends they can rely on for support. That is definitely more than just being quiet and introverted. And it gets crazier when you look at romantic life too. Huge numbers of Gen Z report struggling to find partners, and many young men especially have little to no relationship experience, a pattern that's been documented in recent surveys showing that roughly 44% of Gen Z men didn't date in their teen years at all, which is way higher than previous generations. Some studies even show that Gen Z reports loneliness nearly double what older generations did at the same age, making us statistically the loneliest generation ever. So the fear isn't just being single, it is feeling isolated, disconnected, lacking deep friendships and real relationships in the generation that is supposed to be more connected than ever. Isolation is not just bad emotionally, it has real consequences. When people don't form relationships, they don't build families or have kids, bloodlines just end. But that's not dramatic, that's literal. Whole family lines stop because people never find a partner, never feel stable enough, or never even get close to that stage of life. And it's already happening. Birth rates are collapsing, marriage is down, long-term relationships are down, and it's also the case that Gen Z's on track to be one of the most childless generations in modern history. And it isn't because people hate the idea of family, it is because isolation, financial stress, and social disconnection makes it feel impossible. On a personal level, isolation wrecks people. It is linked to higher depression, worse physical health, shorter life expectancy, and higher anxiety. And it's sad because the longer you're alone, the harder it is to re-enter social life. People lose confidence and your social skills dull. Suddenly, normal human connection feels intimidating, so isolation stops being a phase and it turns into a loop. On a completely different note, getting cancelled is a real fear for Gen Z because everything we've ever said online is saved somewhere. A bad joke, an old opinion, or a message taken out of context can resurface years later and follow you around permanently. A lot of people our age grew up posting online before they fully understood consequences, and if there's no reset button for that, even if you change, mature, or clearly aren't the same person anymore, the record stays. When someone gets cancelled, it usually isn't public or dramatic. Most of the time it's social. People stop responding, invitations disappear, opportunities dry up quietly. You're not confronted, you're just excluded. Because of that, people self-censor constantly. They delete posts, avoid saying what they think, or stay silent altogether. Not out of dishonesty, but because one mistake can outweigh everything else that you are. That fear changes how people act, and it makes people cautious, filtered, and tense in spaces that are supposed to be social. Moving on from that, being ugly is also a real fear for Gen Z because physical appearance affects social outcomes more than it used to. Dating apps, social media, and online platforms prioritize faces first, which means people get judged immediately before anything else about them matters.
Do you know, you're the sort of person I could show you a picture of Paris Hilton and you'd say, what if she turns out to be intelligent?
But what if she did?
Gen Z spends more time looking at attractive people than any generation before. Your feed is filtered with edited photos, filters, cosmetic work, and ideal body types. Over time, this changes what people consider normal and what they consider acceptable.
So I actually do have a new lean maxing strategy that's quite controversial. What I did was I basically blasted a ton of different Adderalls and amphetamines.
Dating apps reinforce this. Matches are based almost entirely on photos. Many people get very little feedback or attention, which leads to them assuming that the problem is how they look. Rejection becomes frequent and impersonal. Likes, views, comments, and followers turn attractiveness into numbers. People can see exactly how much attention others receive and can compare it to themselves directly. This affects behavior. People avoid posting photos, stop approaching others, hesitate to date, and become more self-conscious in public. Appearance anxiety becomes constant instead of situational. For Gen Z, looking unattractive feels like a permanent disadvantage rather than a temporary insecurity. Lastly, we have being replaced by technology. And that's a real fear for Gen Z because automation and AI are hitting right as we're trying to build careers. A lot of people are spending years learning skills that software is now able to do faster, cheaper, and at scale. This creates constant uncertainty. Even people who are competent and hardworking don't feel secure because usefulness is no longer permanent. Skills expire faster than they used to, and staying relevant feels like a moving target instead of a stable path. Like AI changes how people value themselves. So when software companies can replicate creative work, problem solving, or communication, people start questioning what makes them necessary. And that leads to even more anxiety about being interchangeable, disposable, or replaceable. Anyway, I know I didn't get to cover everything in this video, so we'll do 10,000 likes for a part 2. If you guys enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Goodbye.